It's Major Label Debut, the podcast about major label debuts and the podcast about itself. That's right. I'm your host, Graham Wright, and joining me today are both producers of Major Label Debut, John Paul Bullock and Josh Hook. Don't talk yet, I'm still introing, because Major Label Debut is celebrating our first anniversary. Not only did we manage to actually start a podcast, which for the three of us and the kind of schemes we tend to hatch is a real accomplishment in and of itself, but we kept the podcast going for one beautiful year, and it's never been better, and we've never been enjoying it more. And so we thought that in lieu of our usual scintillating, in-depth, news-making, viral-going artist interview, we would interview ourselves and each other and just sort of take stock on where we're at after 1 year, where we're going, what we've learned, what we maybe have forgotten, and all of the friends we made along the way. John Paul, Josh, thank you for doing this podcast with me. Congratulations on 1 year.
Congratulations to you, Graham.
Congratulations to you both. This is an amazing accomplishment. I feel like I genuinely feel great about it.
Yeah, that's how you know you're like real parents, right? You kept it alive for a year.
After that, no jury in the world can convict you. So the following is our list of confessions. We started the podcast because, well, we were looking for something to do together. You know, Josh and I were, 1 year ago, Josh and I were deep in the Tokyo Police Club farewell tour. We were busy. We were distracted. We were coming to the poignant conclusion of something that defined really, you know, our 20 years of our lives, longer than that. And in part, we were just looking for something to do with our creative energy. We were looking for something to do with our friendship energy, I think. And because Josh produces podcasts and I have some broadcast experience, and John Paul is a great music thinker, writer, compiler of. We've talked a lot about your playlists recently, and I continue to salute you for them. And it just felt like, and then so obviously I was like, John Paul, I got it. We should do a movie podcast. And you were very sweetly, you humored me very kindly, and then gently nudged me towards the possibility of maybe, instead of adding to the incredibly tall pile of movie podcasts by people that don't know anything about movies, we should do a podcast about something we do know a lot about, which is music, and we sort of have the bona fides to talk about it. And I had this idea for Major Label Debut as a podcast title sort of kicking around my notes app. And when I said it, you got excited. And then we zoomed Josh into that call. And the rest, as they say, is 1 year's worth of history. Has the podcast turned out like you were expecting, John Paul?
Well, first, I like the idea of zooming Josh in, more like conned Josh into doing this with us. Second, right. Yeah, it's gone much better than I imagined, quite frankly. I feel like we have done so much awesome stuff, and we have so many great interviews that are yet to be broadcast out into the digital ether, and it's growing in such an interesting way where we're meeting all these new people and doing, you know, the kind of show I hoped that we would do, and it's not been without ups and downs, but I do think that the time that we've spent has been worth it for both us as people who make things and then us as friends. I really have enjoyed, more than anything, my heart leaps every time I see a text on our chain, and it truly is just a great use of our time. I really believe it.
I really agree. And it is so true that my most active group texts are just projects that seem to, like Girl from Material, the band, seems to be a project that exists solely to support a group text. And I wouldn't say that about this podcast, but it does. The group text is kind of the best part of it. And it is pinned on my phone. And it's a source of constant joy for me as well. And I really like, you know, throughout the year, we sort of started phasing in these bi-weekly MLD news episodes, which sometimes are literally about news and increasingly are about John Paul and I just sort of talking about whatever interests us to talk about. As the news itself becomes less and less palatable to discuss, we're sort of going madly off in new directions. And I think it's the dream of every podcaster, right? Is to say sort of, wow, this conversation we would have over 4 pints at a bar, if we were to have it very slightly more coherently, maybe there's an audience for it. And I think we've demonstrated conclusively that there is at least an audience for it. So maybe singular, but nevertheless still extant. And I'm really grateful for that. And of course, we should really, really say thank you to everyone who is listening, to everyone who has listened. It's also, I get really immediately embarrassed by any notion of like, I love to talk and then I finish talking and instantly think, why did I waste everyone's time saying that? This is so humiliating. But people keep seeming to listen to the show and to like the show. And I'm just so grateful that there are ears out there who are willing to accept our bantering,
I mean, it's truly amazing, just the thousands of people who've listened and the hundreds of thousands of people who've viewed the social content. It's just the fact that this is even possible is a weird miracle. But thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate all your time, and I hope that you're getting at least some of what we're getting out of this, because it has been incredibly valuable to my life.
And to mine. So maybe, we solicited listener questions and we got a few, which frankly, again, I'm just humbled and delighted by the fact that any came through that weren't from like Graham's mom at rightfamily.org. Not real. Don't email. Please don't email whoever that is thinking it's my mom. And maybe we should start answering some questions and see if that takes us on a voyage of conversation that will, reach bold new frontiers. How does that sound, guys?
Great.
That sounds great.
We didn't script this shit. I'll tell you one thing I've learned since 1 year ago, I was spending like hundreds of hours preparing for every conversation we had. And one thing that has evolved is my preparation, which has gone down a lot. Just the way I like. It's like how Tokyo Police Club never practiced. We just wouldn't rehearse. Because we try and be like, I don't know, we know these songs. Let's go get lunch. This is a similar setup.
Yeah, save the magic for the stage, right?
That's right. Off the cuff. So here it comes. Authentic, unfaked, barely prepared for the MLD Mailbag, the first ever major label debut Mailbag. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions. Josh will be reading them off.
Just going to go down the list. First question from Vicky Von Vicky, asking, how is the podcast going?
Thanks, guys. Vicky Von Vicky, a Toronto area band featuring my friend Mike Wynn, and one of my last 2 solo shows was opening for them. That was like 18 months ago. That's how often I play. John Paul, you wanna field that one? How is the podcast going?
I think it's going great. I mean, I really do. I'm just learning a lot about musicians I admire and getting to hear these stories in such a in-depth way. I mean, I when we originally envisioned the podcast, I think we thought it would be shorter. And I find myself at the end of lots of these conversations thinking, oh, it would have been really cool to have gone in another hour in this direction, or to ask these 5 questions, but the episodes have stretched out in such a organic and kind of fascinating way. And it's really just a tribute to Graham, your ability to be on the mic and engage with these folks, and B, Josh, your ability to cut out the stuff that isn't interesting.
To be fair, there's not that much that's not interesting. You do a great job.
The cutting room floor is pretty tidy around here. Yeah, I really, at the beginning, as you guys certainly can attest to, I really thought that we had a strict set of parameters, and I had a really clear sense of what I thought the conversations should be about and needed to be about, and the kind of rails I felt it needed to stay on. And I think we discovered really quickly that it was way too constraining, and none of us had any interest in being constrained by it. And the show kind of evolved into being a broader, like Major Label Debut started as a very literal title and has sort of broadened into kind of a more metaphorical title in terms of being about just the dissonance of art and commerce and the harmony of art and commerce and what the commercial end of the arts looks like and what it means day to day for people to do these jobs, mostly the jobs of the artist, but as you know, we had Brendan Burke on to talk about the job of the publicist. We had Morgan Naylor on recently to talk about the job of the songwriter. Morgan also is an artist. I don't mean to suggest otherwise, but there's this sort of careers part of it as well that I find endlessly interesting. And it's like, we're sort of, not that it's this strategized, but there's sort of this like taxonomy of the music business as a whole that's slowly beginning to emerge just out of these conversations we have. And I know that it's so fun for me because it's satisfying my personal curiosity directly. This is exactly the resource or the, entertainment product that I have always wanted to pull back the curtain. And actually, if I may submit a question to the mailbag, I have long, since I was a little kid and first got into the mythology of rock and roll, I wanted to know how it worked. I wanted to look behind the curtain and really get inside of it. And I wanted to be in a band, partially because I just wanted to be in a recording studio, and I wanted to be backstage at a concert. And I just wanted to enter through the artist door. I wanted to be with the band. And there have been points in my career variously where I've sort of stopped and thought, oh, geez, mystery and remove are really important things in the history of rock and roll mythology. They're not very popular anymore. Everyone is now showing everything all the time because of the necessities of the content machine. And we're here on MLD, ripping the curtain open with a big spotlight looking around. And it's very much my natural tendency, but I'm curious how pulling back the curtain has felt for you guys. And if you ever have a voice in your head saying, oh God, maybe we should be shrouding things rather than shining a light on them.
A part of this that has really been eye-opening and something that we've had interest in for a long time is kind of the artist advocacy side of the music industry. And I'm remembering the Colin Newman interview and just kind of hearing from other people what they went through and how they navigated their own creative landscapes has been sort of a nice debrief for me personally, coming out of one phase of the music industry and into whatever the next phase may be.
I do feel like that idea sort of, because I do think most people who are doing this podcast so far have done a lot of press already, and that they understand the things that they do want to share and the things that they don't want to share. And sometimes it's been kind of a challenge to get them out of the fear-based position that most artists I've encountered as a journalist are in when you start an interview, where they are used to bad questions, they're used to repetitive questions, they're used to people asking inappropriate things, and the idea of creating an environment where people are comfortable to share and people are comfortable to expand a little bit on their personal mythologies is really, I think, desirable to me and a healthy thing where we can advance good art into the universe a little in an incremental way that doesn't remove entirely the mystery of it, doesn't make it bland or kind of common or cheap, that it makes that you realize that every single one of these people has in one way or another triumphed over incredible odds to make a career as an artist. And it's really just, I used this word earlier, but miraculous that they're able to do this and still be able to talk about themselves in this kind of bizarre, so many people have gone through the process that I've sort of watched you two go through, which is processing out these traumatic changes in their lives, especially the older guests that we've had who've had these 20, 30, 40-year long careers, like a person like Colin, who's been in many different scenes, has, contributed all of this work to all these other people's lives and still manages to be someone who I want to know more about, and someone who still keeps his secrets, it's just, I I don't know. I mean, I find myself at the end of almost every single one of these conversations still wanting to learn more about these people, still wanting to revisit their music, still wanting to consider their art. And I hope that they also feel that way, that they feel like that what we've done is serve them up an easy volley or just a big fat softball that they can smack out of the park.
Absolutely. And they seem to be hitting the home runs, so we must be doing something right. And I really agree with what Josh said as well about, I remember back in the day when WTF with Mark Maron, RIP, was sort of new or newly emerging into the mainstream. And I was listening to it and I was complaining to a friend of mine about how, the interviews are interesting, but the podcast always starts with this long, rambling, update on his life and him talking. And my friend, who himself is a great broadcaster, said, you got to listen to it like this is like a story about a guy who didn't make it, who's trying to make sense of that and come to terms with that by talking to people who did make it. That's no longer really applicable because Mark Maron, via that podcast, did end up making it. But I feel like in the wake of Tokyo Police Club ending and beginning to sort of rebuild my sense of where I stand in the music industry, around the music industry, this podcast has kind of been that voyage. And I don't expect people to like listen to it as my story, but for me, one of the things that I've loved so much about it is getting to sort of process those feelings. You can hear it in the interview I did with Greg from Tokyo. Obviously, we really get into it, but with everyone, it's sort of these different aspects of what it means to make music and what it means to endure making music. Guys like Colin, guys like Bob Berryhill, or guys like Dave Alvin, who have been doing it are just so, there's so much wisdom there, and I'm so glad and privileged to get to like steal it from them. Next question.
That's a great. All right, now I'm not going in order anymore. We're going to shake it up because I feel like this segues. How have these conversations changed the way you write music?
Who sent that one in?
That is from Dud Guacamole.
That's right. Instagram user, friend of the show, Anna. Hi, Anna. We love you. If she listens, she might just follow me on Instagram. Well, I would say that doing the show has really changed the way I think about my music, in that I feel increasingly freed from my own self-imposed like industry and commercial shackles. And that's a really tricky thing. And this is one of the things that the podcast is kind of designed to analyze, is the way that like the outer critic becomes your inner critic. Like when you work as a professional musician, you are obliged on some level to take into consideration the audience and the, like the consumer base for your music. And I was thinking about this morning for some reason. It always intrigues me when you hear artists evaluate their career in a way that just so happens to exactly match the public conception of it. Rivers Cuomo is a lot like that. I heard an interview with Bono recently where he was sort of talking about their, pop and the early 90s U2 sort of like left turn. And he was really articulate about it. He seemed very analytical and very clear-minded, but the point of view he was articulating was exactly where that record already sits in the public consciousness. And I simply cannot think that that's just a coincidence, or that it's like, oh yeah, everyone was just right. There's like a right and a wrong answer, and everyone was right, and Bono agrees. I think that those voices just almost inevitably get internalized, and a lot of the smartest and wisest seeming people that we've spoken to on this show have been pretty clear about eschewing that. I shouldn't use that word because I can never say it right, but it's the word I want. ESCHEWING, that. And I myself have begun to feel freed from it. And then that bleeds into my writing because I'm just like letting my freak flag fly, and I'm following a different North Star than I think I was, 2 years ago when I was writing songs. I had a different sense of like what my music needed to be, but I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it like, this is what I like to do. This is what's cool. This is what's good to me. And then, you start to clear the clutter off the shelf, and it really changes your perspective. And of course, your perspective then changes your art. So that's how it's worked for me. John Paul, how has this affected the development of your forthcoming masterpiece?
It has gotten me to buy a lot more gear. That's the truth of it. One of my other favorite text chains I'm on is a Gear text chain, and I just got a Chroma console, which I'm very excited. I literally, in my calendar, there's an appointment for 3 hours today for me to sit in this room and play with that Chroma console and teach myself how to make good music, hopefully, with it. And even this morning, I had to stop myself. I really, really want a bass 6. And I have no reason to own that object, but will be mine. And I feel like not just in terms of me making music as a hobbyist, but in terms of my, all the other work I do, all my writing, all the music writing I've been doing, it really has taught me a lot about interviewing and what you want to get out of an interview, and how, like you were talking about earlier about preparation and the kind of like embracing kind of jamming with people, and the fluidity of these situations often leads to better results than, we do frankly, a lot of research, a lot of tape conversations about the people we're going to interview. We listen to the records. We, are digging through books and articles online. But at the end of the day, I think the magic of what happens in the moment is very real on this podcast. It's also very real in most creative situations that I have really benefited from, and trying to get to a place with all this gear where I can be like creative in the moment and not be so analytical, as you said.
Yeah, it's funny because this is such an analytical project, and we spend so much time thinking and chin stroking, and then you're trying to, like, the upshot of all of that is to try and come up with pure creativity rather than analytical creativity, which is kind of like you got all that from a whole bag of oranges situation. But
look, I've always been it takes 4 hours to do 1 hour of creative work, and I don't understand any other way to make things other than that. So I'm trying hard not to punish myself nowadays for that process. I just to hopefully, when I'm in those moments where all cylinders are firing, to really enjoy it and lean into it and get what I can get out of it in that moment, not really thinking too much about the end result of any of it.
Amen.
I think the thing that jumps out to me too was the nice reset of the conversation with Morgan, and her talking about writing with Kim Deal, and just Kim Deal's banging on a drum for 2 minutes and then saying, okay, go put vocals on it. And that was such an interesting way, because you find this path normally when you're writing a song, or I find myself falling into the same traps of, all right, there's this layer, now I got to put a guitar on it, now I got to make all these decisions, and you're kind of limiting your options as you go. And hearing, or just being reminded again, that you can start a creative journey from any point with any set of ingredients. And it was a nice, refreshing reset to be like, oh yeah, you can just, the vocal that you put on just some drums is going to have much different weight than the one that you put on with a 90% finished song. It was a fun lesson to relearn.
Yeah, that was a great anecdote. And listen to the Morgan Naylor episode of Major Label Debut for that story and more like it, because that's a great one.
All right, next question. Patrice Escrox?
I've never known how to say it. Longtime follower, Patrice.
Okay.
We salute you, even though we've never said your handle out loud.
Which album would you most like to cover in the future?
John Paul, you start.
I'd love to talk to Ben Gibbard about Death Cab's move to Atlantic from Barsuk. I think that would be great. I'd love to talk to Tegan and Sarah, Canadian legends, Tegan and Sarah. I'd love to talk to anyone from REM or related to REM. As a kid and still today, they're one of those, like, I think REM is to me as Radiohead is to you, Graham, and maybe the Strokes are to you, Josh. I don't know. Like, I don't know if that I can speak for you about those foundational bands, but I just, there's something about, I just went on Sunday to see the B-52s and Devo, and both of those bands I would love to have on this show. I heard from a friend that Mark Mothersbaugh was at least aware of this podcast. And if he is listening to it now, dude, we would love to talk to you. But yeah, also any of the people from the B-52s, those bands were foundational for me. Also, I would love to do more of the 90s grunge stuff, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, those bands were such a huge deal for me. And jam bands, the surviving members of the Grateful Dead, or Jefferson Airplane, or bands from the 60s, 70s, 80s that were the things that I listened to as a teenager. I feel like so many of those things are rooted in my early music experiences. My desires to explore people's careers come from that age 10 to age 18, before I was a college radio nerd.
Yeah, it's this. I think we love music in a similar way, and I'm sure this resonates with a certain subset of our listenership. Of where you love it so much, and especially when you're that age where it's not enough just to listen to it. You want to rip it open and crawl inside of it and see how every little sinew of it functions and connects. And you can never know it intimately enough to satisfy the feeling it gives you. And I think that's that can lead you down some demystification roads that don't always shake out, but it can also really deepen and enrich your appreciation for it, especially because all of us in our own ways have made a life out of loving music, and we live behind the curtain in a certain way. And so there's a demystification that's just taken place existentially. I can never listen to music anymore the way I listened to music before I was in a professional band, or before I picked up a guitar and tried to write my own music. And better or for worse, that's gone. And so I might as well enjoy my behind the curtain existence. And to answer that question, all of those you said are extremely on my list. Certainly Plans by Death Cab. And then for me, my white whale is getting someone from Interpol to talk about Our Love to Admire, because not just because I think it's a fascinating music story of this band coming out of nowhere with this very, sort of, even in the scene that they were lumped into of the rock is back New York guitar scene, they kind of had their own thing going on, and it was sonically different, aesthetically different. It was just had a different manner to it entirely. Everyone in Tokyo Police Club was a huge Interpol fan, perhaps needless to say, huge influence on me and on us. And they were only a few years ahead of us. So they were really we were kind of at the beginning of our career in the same arena as them. And then they signed to a major label. They got this big deal. They got this big producer. They made this big splashy album. We were on tour on a bunch of UK festivals the summer that album came out, and they were headlining a bunch of those festivals. So we saw them play that set night after night after night. And that album was not a smash success. And Interpol's career, looked at now, kind of goes like the first album, holy shit. The second album, oh my God. The third album, oh. And then it starts to drift, and they've made a lot of great music since then, and they've done really well. And they see, in Mexico, for instance, they are humongously gigantic. So it's not as though they went away or flopped or anything like that, but this seemingly unstoppable ascent kind of slammed into this major label thing. And it seems like a situation where maybe making that leap was not the best idea. And even if it was, it definitely changed their trajectory in a very clear, measurable way. And I would love to hear what their perspective is, both on how they went into making that record and what they expected and what they hoped for and what they were told and promised, and then what it actually felt like to go through that process and how they look back at it now. It's tough because Interpol is a band. They're making records right now. They are still active, and I understand. Same thing with Ben Gibbard, same thing with Colin Malloy from the Decemberists. They're not necessarily going to want to go on a podcast and have the kind of conversation I want to have, warts and all, about how these records didn't necessarily go according to plan, or whether they think they did or not. But that's why I want to have these conversations, I think, to me, that's the first bands I wanted to talk to when we started this podcast were like Death Cab and Interpol. And so they're still out there. So if anyone knows Paul Banks, send him my way. I like the record. I'm not going to talk shit. I just want him to talk shit.
I mean, also, I'd like to do more interviews with label people, particularly indie label people like Discord and Merge and Matador and Sub Pop and Arts and Crafts and all the great indie labels, and just kind of, showcase the incredible output that they've had over the decades. And, I think we've got some other industry people lined up that are coming on that do other things other than making music or releasing music. But, I'd like to have a lot more women on the show. I'd like to have a lot more people of color on the show. I'd like to, go back through the thousands of records I have and find some kind of people who don't often do podcasts and hunt them down and shame them into coming on the show.
Well, it was so cool to talk about like the Surfaris, or to talk to some of these people who were in a version of the music industry that does not exist anymore. And a lot of the people who are around it aren't around anymore. And it feels like getting this incredible information that is disappearing and isn't necessarily recorded that many places. And even just as sort of like a Lomax style archival project of stories of what it meant to be in a rock band in 1956 and signed to a record, like what a record label was in 1956. I find that stuff endlessly fascinating.
I know that, Josh, I'm very curious if you have one artist that you just like, this is the person I'd love to hear talk about their career.
I'm riding Graham's coattails because Interpol has to be number one. And I think Graham mentioned it just because we traveled in so many of the same circles early on. Our manager at the time used to work with somebody who worked with Interpol. We recorded our second record with Peter Cadis, who also did Interpol's first two, or maybe just the second record, first two. When we were making that record, we traveled to see them play at Madison Square Garden, and there was a whole thing there. And I think
on that record, there's like this I'm saving it for when we do that episode so I can use it in the intro. It's an amazing story that I'm just teasing now, so look out for that.
I'd also really like to have Liz Pelly on to talk about her book about Spotify, which to me has been the most important piece of music writing I've read this calendar year. Oh yeah, there we go.
There it is. Yeah. Mood Machine, The Rise of Spotify, and the Costs of the Perfect Playlist.
Liz, if you're listening to this, or if anybody knows Liz, we're going to reach out to you for sure. But yeah, there's all these other books like Meet Me in the Bathroom and Sell Out, and that sort of look at scenes. And similar to the interview we did with Dan and Nate about their incredible book about Orange County, I'd like to use the podcast more to explore scenes that have not been like as in everyone's face, and talk about, great music. Like, I mean, to me, like I was saying about like Athens in the late 70s, early 80s, or, like Midwest emo or whatever, I there's all this stuff I want to talk about. And one of the things that I found so freeing about this is that we have not been tied to any specific scene. We've talked to people who put out records in the early 1960s, and we've talked to people who put out records this year. And it's, no rules, baby. No rules.
That's right. No rules. Next question.
Viz for Vron
Something
asks,
like that.
When are we interviewing Josh Hook?
Right now. He's in a soundproof booth backstage.
How are you handling being torn between your home city of Toronto, Ontario, and your adopted city of Los Angeles, California in these trying World Series times?
I mean, you have to, it's Blue Jays all the way. But this is wonderful. I'm looking forward to great baseball.
Josh, as a former pitcher yourself, what is the solution for Shohei? How do you solve a problem like Ohtani?
Man, just, I don't know how do you get in his head? The guy's so solid. I don't know if you can solve him. I think you have
gambling related heckles.
Oh.
Allegedly.
Yeah. That certain fan behind home plate just has to put like some good gambling tips or odds on his shirt.
Yeah, Shohei. Heard about a really good parlay there, man. Just come over here real quick. So there you go. There's our interview with Josh Hook. We're going to carve that out into a separate episode of MLD. I will say, as a longtime collaborator with Josh across a wide variety of bands and projects, starting in grade 4 and continuing until both of us are deep in the cold ground, that while Josh is a man of few words, he obviously is the beating heart of this podcast and of every project I've ever worked on with him. And also the best driver I've ever known. So that's the Josh Hook experience. That's the mystery. We're pulling back a lot of curtains here, but there's one curtain that will ever be shut. And behind that curtain is the truth of Joshua Hook.
We truly, I think that the person who cares the most about this, the person who is most responsible for its quality, the person who is doing the work day in, day out, is Josh. I cannot thank you enough for everything you've done for this so far and everything that you're going to be forced to do for many years to come. I just want you and your family to know that I am thankful for us taking you away from your children and your wife and your career, your real career, to slave over removing my like deep, heavy breathing and weird noises.
I'm supposed to remove it? I've been amplifying it.
That's on a separate paid-only feed.
Yeah, check out MLD Plus for all that and more.
If you tilt the plus on its side, it's an X. Sorry.
It's been a wonderful team to be a part of, and I can't thank you guys enough for giving me such great stuff to work with and for your friendships, which I value very deeply.
Hopefully next year we will do this 2-year anniversary recording in the same room.
I'll get a real mic.
Ooh.
You can borrow some of my new gear.
Yeah, you'll be on like a Peter Frampton, like, so guys, someone want to know.
All right, what else do we have here? From Justin Nichols, what is the best pre-MLD song used in a movie and why?
That's a very specific question. I think he must mean a song by a band who did eventually make a major label debut, but had not yet made it when the song that was used in the movie was recorded. From that subcategory, what's the best example?
Thank you, Justin, for the awesome question and for being an awesome dude. And I'm not sure. I think that it's, yeah, obviously it pre-major label debut, but the song I think about the most is Mudhoney's Touch Me, I'm Sick, that was then used as Touch Me, I'm Dick in the 1992 Cameron Crowe film Singles, which in itself is like a document of a scene. And that scene that I was talking about wanting to get deeper into, where the band, the fictional band that Matt Dillon's in, is like members of Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, and that there are all these cameo, like Chris Cornell cameo, and just kind of like investigation of Seattle in the late 80s, early 90s. But I always thought it was a brilliant way to not only kind of skewer some kind of self-serious music, but also to, like point out the kind of dude dominated, world that those guys were in, that movie is so much about, these relationships between men and women. And it's also kind of like a great dick joke that sits really firmly in the center of that film. And I love Cameron Crowe, and I love particularly that era of Cameron Crowe, like leading up to Almost Famous, and which is, another movie that's packed with great songs. And
maybe we should get Cameron Crowe on major label debut.
He would be great. I mean, that's another thing, is like more of these music film people, I think, would be really cool. I mean, he is like the music journalist that defines my life. I think very specifically about an interview he did with Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder specifically I believe it was in Spin or Rolling Stone, at the peak of their, white hot popularity, and how it was such a informative. It was like, oh, this is what music journalism is. This guy really cares. And he's also, made that Pearl Jam 20 movie with them, and just has made a ton of great movies. And I'd love to, we should try to get him on. That would be great.
Oh yeah. Is the Velvet Underground and Nico a major label record?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, then I can't use that. Trying to think of needle drops I can remember in this moment. Oh no, the Wipeout, which is on a major label debut, but maybe there's a recording of it that predates their major label debut.
Yeah, definitely. Like the first single's not. Yeah.
Special shout out to its use in the Simpsons episode, Cape Fear, I think, where Sideshow Bob dedicates it to Bart with the message, "I'm coming to kill you." And we were just talking about how surf music is associated with Halloween strangely often. And that's a great example of sort of like the maniacal laugh at the beginning of Wipeout being used as the maniacal laugh of the killer Sideshow Bob. So that's not a movie, but that's my answer.
Well, it's so funny because this podcast, I think, really is defined by, like, the first intro to the first episode is about Elliott Smith and the Oscars. And then we just recently, had the singer from Say Ferris who talked about being in 10 Things I Hate About You. And we just recently had, almost all of the musicians that we've had on this show have had some success in Hollywood getting syncs and licensing. And that's such a big part of the, of musicians making a living. It'd be great to get a music supervisor on. We, one thing I wanted to save for when we have Ben Gibbard or someone from Death Cab on is I met early in my career, Alex Patsavas, who's like a very influential, music supervisor, and she did all those soundtracks for the OC, and Death Cab, famously was featured on the OC, and that really helped elevate their status. And I am in the crowd in those scenes, although not on camera, I don't think, but it was like I was at another job working on the TV show Medium, and I was introduced to her, and she was like, "We're filming over there. Do you want to come and be in the show?" And I was like, "Absolutely, yes." And just told my boss, I was like, "I'll be back in 6 hours or something." And he was like, "Okay, all right." So yeah, we should get a music super on to talk about placement and syncs. Like there's this great company called Bank Robber run by this really nice band named Lyle, who he has had an independent company where he has done film and TV placements. And there's just so many, like almost every single band we've had on has had a song prominently on a soundtrack to a movie or love.
Himmelfarb, friend of the show.
Friend of the show.
Asks, what's your biggest takeaway after doing all of these interviews? My biggest takeaway is that he still hasn't come on yet.
Steven, if you're listening to this, we know where you live. We do. We've all been to your home. You're going to have to come on this podcast at some point in time.
We're going to Michael Moore you. We're going to get you on the way to your car.
Show up. I'll be waiting outside. It'll be like Graham chasing you down the street and then Josh waiting in the alley.
And after that, we'll record the podcast. My biggest takeaway, which I think I alluded to a bit earlier, and I knew when I was saying it that I was probably stomping on a later question, but it's from talking, especially to the people who have been around for a little bit longer, who have sort of, made not just like a living, but a life in the music industry. Time and again, they keep coming back to, it's one of those notions that I think seems so obvious that it's easy to discount until you hear someone who has acquired the wisdom about it say it, which is simply that the only reliable, true thing you can do as an artist is to follow your own muse and to be as true to yourself and as honest in any given moment as you know how to be. And, we talk obviously a lot about the way that the industry and the commerce of it all influences the music, but you gotta follow something. You got to know which way north is. And regardless of the detours you take along the way, you got to remember there's a path you're coming back to. And hearing that over and over from these people who are impossible to ignore. You can't ignore what Colin Newman says about making art. You have to listen to him because he's Colin Newman. And that's really been a lesson, not only that's been great to learn, but for me, that's been like really important and very timely to learn, because I'm popping out the end of this, 20 years of professional music peddling into an uncertain future. And it can be really easy to lose track. And I sit there with my guitar sometimes just sort of lost like Burridin's ass. And I feel like my own understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing and what's actually important and meaningful about it for me has been sharpened to a great extent by doing this podcast. And more than anything, that's what I'm grateful for about having done it. That's a selfish takeaway, but I'm a selfish guy because I'm still an artist at heart, baby. John Paul, how about you?
I think it's just to keep making stuff, even when things don't go the way you want them to, even when things seem like your career is over. The good part about this, and the only important thing, is that you keep your output going, and it can come over a longer timeline or in the wee hours of the night for yourself, for your friends, for your family. I just to not stop, because so many of these people we've talked to so far have managed to do that. And every time I hear the kind of stories of resilience and survival, it is inspiring to me. And it's the biggest thing I'm reminded of too, is that like, I obviously when we all started our careers, we didn't think we would be doing something like this for part of our job. And, just the fact that we've done so much of it now. I mean, we're approaching 50 episodes. We've got this huge body of work that we've done now just over the last year. I look back on it and think, like, I'm just so glad I did every single one of these things. I'm so glad I kept doing it. I'm so glad that even in times where we all had personal commitments or other work stuff that got in the way, we were able to rearrange, trudge through, prioritize this, and now we did it, and it can't be undone. It exists, and that's all. It's the life is short, art is long. That's the truth of it. Like, that is what it is.
Well said.
Yeah. I'll take it. Thanks, guys.
All right. What do we have here? From Instagram, Amelie Twin asks, is Will Curry the same Will Curry from Will Curry and the Country French?
He sure is. I referenced Will recently. We were talking about the omnichord, and I was talking about how the omnichord and also the Casio tone that I stole from Will were sort of my formative musical instruments when him and I started a band when we were in grade 8. Yes, that's the same Will Curry. We were in a band in high school together with the other Tokyo guys, and then that band ended. Will and I were the singers of that band. It was called Suburbia. We made an EP. We'd get together and home record. It was like a high school band. We get together, play in the basement. Will's parents, miraculously, when we were starting the band, moved into a new house that had a recording studio in the basement, so had like a soundproofed room. It wasn't, it didn't have gear in it or anything, but it had a soundproofed room that sounded good, that was designed for making music in. So we just moved right into it. And every Friday night we'd get pizza and we'd jam and write songs and play the songs we had. And we'd rent like an old digital 8-track or whatever and record demos. And like most high school bands and most high school relationships, it petered out by the end of high school. And then, Josh and Dave and Greg started this other band that I eventually joined that would go on to become Tokyo Police Club. Meanwhile, Will, who continued to be a great songwriter, started a band called Will Curry and the Country French, who put out a couple records on Sloan's label, Murder Records, and toured with Tokyo a little bit and with Sloan some and around a bit. And they're inactive now. I'm not sure if they're done for good or just done for now. Will is a busy man and a father. And I just saw him the other night. I was in his town playing a show with my band Parklife, and we got to have 10 minutes of conversation. And as always, when I see Will, it was like 10 of the funniest minutes of conversation I've had this year. And Yeah, the Country French was a great band. They were not a cool band by the standards of the moment that they were making music, and I think that really was an obstacle between, like, to be an indie band in 2006 but to not be making angular, post-punk influenced, Strokes influenced, like, rock music, and instead to be sort of doing like piano chamber pop. It was a tough sell, but the records are great, and I think they probably sound even better now absent that context. So anyone listening should check out Will Curry and the Country French. And they had one song that was in like a XKCD or one of those like big web comics. They made a video and put one of Will's songs in it. So they do have one song with like numbers on streaming that's also beautiful. And so that's my shout out to them. Will Curry, I literally would not be who I am or like a musician at all without him. So we thank him / blame him.
Yeah, I remember Will is a phenomenal songwriter, and I remember all of the people in that band were just such great players.
It was 5 percussion majors and a guitar major. And so they were really tight, and the guitar player shredded. But shredding on guitar was not cool in 2006. People were not playing solos like that.
That person also had a second question, which is, and this ties back into the early talk about group chats from girlfriend material. Are we going to hear any more independent music from you, Graham, or girlfriend material?
Yes. I'm so happy to exclusively reveal the breaking news on this podcast that Girlfriend Material's Christmas album, Hyped for the Holidays, will be coming out this December. It is literally being mastered as we speak. And Girlfriend Material started in like 2016, 2017. It was a real different. It was like 4 bachelors getting beers and jamming. And it was a really beautiful thing in all of our lives at the moment. And one of the things I was really excited about, because I am a sentimental guy and I find Christmas to sort of be like the sentimental center of the calendar universe, I love the idea of a Christmas tradition. I wanted to put out a Girlfriend Material Christmas EP every year with like a cover of a classic song, an original or 2, and sort of did it for like 3 years. And then in the meantime, everyone sort of scattered off and went from being bachelors to being husbands and fathers and moved to different places. And then COVID happened and the whole project got a little bit derailed. So I reconceived it as, well, why don't we just take all these songs that I have home recorded that sound like dog shit and record them in a real studio and make it a real record. And we started that process last summer. And had an amazing time with Nixon Boyd, who is our drummer, Jake's brother. They both play in Colorado as well. Nix has a great studio in Orillia, Ontario. We went out there, cut 12 tracks live off the floor, and then we put a few of them out last Christmas, but we didn't have time to finish all of them. And now, just barely, we have found time to finish them. And we just were approving like track lists this morning and mixes, and it's sounding, to my ears, really great and like a real clear statement of the exact sentimentality that, while I am trying to leave it behind from like a psychological progress perspective, is nevertheless a defining part of my personality and my art. And it is celebrated in full flower here on the Girlfriend Material Christmas record. So that is coming out. And then next year I will release solo music or music under a new moniker or something. I don't know what I'm going to call it, but I've written like a ton of songs that I'm incredibly excited about and will release in, I don't know, January, February, something like that. Thank you for asking. Thank you for being interested in my shit.
Also, Amelie Twin, we see you in the comments. Thank you for posting and supporting the show and the way that you have. It means a lot to us and to everyone who's wrote in questions or has liked stuff or listened to the show. I mean, it is overwhelming to just feel the love in this very diffused kind of radiant way. It's truly great. And I've had so many lovely compliments and so many folks who I didn't even know were listening to the show bring up weird details about something Graham said or how much they want Josh to be interviewed at length about his life and every detail of his life and how he should be on social media, but he's not. And they're very sad that Josh is not on social media.
Stay strong, Josh.
I'd also love to thank everybody that writes a review to actually take the time to sit down and bang out a sentence, whether it's complimentary or not. You know, the reviews are great. They help us learn. We can cut this part, but do you guys want to read some reviews from the last year? Just like shout out hop things.
Yeah, that's all the questions.
That's all the questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think as an ending, let's just read a few review highlights, because I don't read them. So I want to, and let's not cut this out. Let's leave this in.
Yeah. No, I'm fascinated by this.
It's a peek behind the curtain. This is what the show's
What about
all
the
about.
Is there any 1-star reviews that are like the Amazon, like, I hate these people?
Well, the thing, there are people that give it 1 star, but they don't then leave a review. So I'm like, yeah, we have some 1 stars.
I think those are whoever those people are, you're our enemy now. If you're if you've listened to this, we're gonna find you, like the Jay and Silent Bob movie, where they just go from house to house to the people who wrote negative comments online. And
I think it's either people that think there's too much Taylor Swift or not enough Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. I'm bracing for the Taylor blowback or support, like for people to come out of the woodwork to tell us that our cold takes on Life of a Showgirl are exactly right. I think that's likely to happen.
Very wanted. Yeah.
It's Jason Kelsey is like, listen, you guys, I don't like it either. I can't say anything.
I'm trapped. So trapped.
These are just some reviews I'm pulling up from the last year. Love it. 5 stars. Graham Wright is such a great host. Very good at interviews and talking solo. Enthusiastic, curious, and insightful.
Wow. You know, I haven't had a report card in a lot of years, and so this is actually, I'm ashamed of the warm, fuzzy feeling that instantly appears inside of me.
Oh, this one's good. Guards down, interest up. The artist-y interviews have all been very relaxed and forthcoming. It feels, in the best way, like eavesdropping on what musicians talk about when the muggles aren't around. The wonderful thing that connects them all is the love of the art.
That is exactly what I want it to be. That is the idea, right? It's like musicians get together and yak about music. You know, you meet someone. I think about this when I go to talk to people, especially some of the bands that I'm less familiar with. I get stressed about it, and I remind myself, if I met this person at a party, we would have a lot in common because we're both professional musicians, or we have been professional musicians. And I just want to engage with it on that level as two people with a shared knowledge base, but with very different experiences of it. So I'm so relieved that that is coming across.
Yeah, it's not just us that give you compliments. There are people out here that really enjoy
You didn't write
those? And then, I mean, we're going to read them all. There's one 3-star review that says, too many ads. There's a great interview in here, but it's buried in so many ads, the show is a challenge to enjoy. We heard that review, and I don't, last few months, for a while, we've been running the show with no ads. We recently started putting them at the front and the end. You know, the challenge is, how do you keep it going without ads, without, you know, creating a Paul's Deep Voice MLD Plus subscription tier? Maybe that's the answer that we have to look into.
It. An OnlyFans where I just read, like, you know, all of Our Band Could Be Your Life illegally to just create our own audiobook of I'll do it. I'm here for it. I'll totally available for Cameo. If you want me to wish your uncle happy birthday, I will do that.
We should start a Cameo.
We'll start tricking the artists we have on into doing cameos that we've sold. Yeah, Paul Banks, great to talk to you. Just one final question. Could you just read? It's for our sound checking. Could you just read the words on this card? That's beautiful. Thanks for reading those, Josh. That made me feel great inside.
It makes me so happy that people took the time to do that. Thank you, everyone who's commented, everyone who is listening to this over an hour now of us ramble on. This is beautiful. I'm having so much fun.
Me too. And I should say, my friend Michael, who plays in the band Good Kid, DM'd me a question of his own, which is very specific and I would love to talk about, but I don't know the answer, which was about how the financial breakdown for a band used to work before the modern streaming era. I guess because, to Michael, I'm old and have been around for a long time in the music industry. But Tokyo Police Club, truthfully, when we started, iTunes was already kind of the thing. And while we did sell CDs in the early days, and, you know, I think Elephant Shell did sell like 40,000 CDs or something, which is not nothing. Although at the time everyone treated it like it was nothing. I wasn't paying attention to the financials back then, but I think it would be a very interesting episode at some point in terms of, the taxonomy of the music industry, to sort of discuss where the money comes from now and where the money came from in the past, and just how bands have cobbled together a living over, at this point, almost 3 decades of real turbulence and the bottom falling out in slow motion or maybe fast motion of the music industry. So, Michael, sorry to not answer that question now or via DM, but I think it deserves a deeper consideration. And I can think of a few musicians I know who pay more attention to that stuff and are more savvy about that stuff than me. One of them is Josh Hook, who I can talk to, and we could sort of put something together on that. So maybe that's something to look forward to in 2026. Shout out to Michael.
Well, one of the things we talked about also was doing at least one test version of like a live episode of this. So if y'all would like to come out IRL and see this thing happen in real time, let us know. Ideally, sometime in the next year, we put that together and test it out either in Toronto or Los Angeles. And that would be super fun experiments. Also, there's other, like, if you have suggestions for anything, guests, things we should talk about, things that we should do, anything that you would enjoy more on the show, just hit us up. Write it in the comments, send us direct messages. We will respond. We're in this all day long, every day. I mean, sincerely. So, please just reach out and let us know. And thank you for all the comments and the questions and the love, the radiant love. It is, we love you too. It's coming back from the side of the screen or mic.
John Paul, Josh, first of all, thank you so much for doing this with me. Congratulations on a year. Thank you for everything. As you may be aware, we always end every episode of Major Label Debut by asking what we think is the most important question, which is, of course, well, you guys disappear into the inky digital blackness during my conversations with these artists. What are you eating?
All right, I've got 2 things to say. One, if it's early in the morning, I make a terrifying shake from a company called Zymogen that is it is made mostly of rice protein, and it is keeping me alive, literally keeping me alive. If it is later in the day, I will, before the podcast begins, go into the kitchen, warm up the oven, and I, as a treat to myself, will make gluten-free chicken nuggets that I will then cut up like a baby, put into a bowl, cover in mustard, and then ravenously shovel into my mouth as I listen to you talk. I just want you to picture that next time you're mid discussion when you're talking to Liz Pelly about how Spotify has permanently devalued recorded music. I want you to know that I'm just in the darkness, just shoveling chicken nugget pieces into my mouth, and smearing mustard all over my face.
I will keep that in mind.
Most of the time, it's some form of breakfast if I'm lucky. And I eat it today. It was a English muffin with egg and cheese.
Wow, that's like a real meal.
It's nice. I mean, it's small. But the reason that I was scared of doing this is because I always spill it, and when I'm camera off, you can't see that.
Yeah.
But today it happened, and I was like, "Shit, camera's on." So it's just on the floor here. My dog hasn't got to it yet. So maybe I'll just edit it out if you can't see it, or I'll leave it in.
I didn't notice. I, like a fool, consume 1 IKEA bottle full of water over the first 40 minutes of the interview, and then I always allot an hour mentally, even though our interviews routinely go 90 minutes, if not 2 full hours. And so I spend the entire second half of the podcast just dying in my chair, having these amazing conversations, like, wow, and that gives me 10 more questions to ask, and we're really getting to the bottom of something, but also I may die. I may die in this chair of urine retention. So that's what's going on my end of things when we make the show. There's no escape. I should start wearing a diaper. 2026, This is for the OnlyFans. If you pay extra, we'll give you the camera angle that's below this one. of me just in a diaper.
Oh no. Oh no.
Well, if we're not doing ads.
I know.
It's either that or ads, okay? You don't want to get recruited for ICE? Well, you're going to have to look at my diaper. I don't make the rules. And on that note, shout out to Mr. Greg Alsop, whose amazing theme music for Major Label Debut has defined the show and kind of like was the first thing that really made it feel real to me as a podcast. Greg also was such a great guest. If you haven't listened to the episode where we had Greg on, it's two friends who like hadn't talked since their band of 20 years broke up, talking for the first time, and we just had like a beautiful, in-depth, warm, loving conversation about our lives and life and art and making the theme song for MLD. So shout out to Greg, shout out to all of you. The podcast is, of course, produced as discussed by John Paul Bullock and Josh Hook, whose voices you heard today and whose handiwork you hear every week. And I would say to go out, I'm just going to stop talking and we should just like let the MLD theme song play in total, however long it is, for the people to finally just hear and enjoy unencumbered. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. Any final words before I sign off?
Greg has a bunch of other cool music projects,
shout them out.
Including a new-ish band called Delta Underground that's putting out big, cool singles, and he's touring in a bunch of other bands too. So go to Greg's website. Also, if you're in PEI, you should go there and like learn music from him, drums, and he's got a cool studio and he produces and does all this stuff. So again, thank you, Greg. I just wanted to say that. I'm sure you do not get thanked enough for everything you do in your life. But also, I love you both. Thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you both for doing it with me. Thank you all for listening. 1 year down, many more still to go. Major Label Debut will be back again and again and again with more tales from the intersection of art and commerce. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.